important lessons of the global economic meltdown is that no society, developed or developing, is ever safe from the vagaries of human agency. Developed economies had long been regarded as immune to major breakdown. We now know differently. Decades of structural challenges, coupled with poor financial controls and sheer human greed, have left Europe and America with, as Harvard economist Danny Roderick rightly puts it, debilitating challenges. That's bad news for the citizens of developed economies. And yes, the crisis poses challenges for us too. However, the challenges now faced by developed economies also present Africa and Asia with the unique opportunity to close the gap between developing and developed economies. Roderick says of Europe and America's fragile recovery, and I quote, "In such an environment, rapid growth in the developing world is the only thing that could propel the world economy forward and generate increasing demand for rich country goods and services, the only silver lining in an otherwise dreary future." Africa and Asia have learned the important lessons of debt and financial crisis through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. African and Asian economies learned through bitter experience the importance of sound macroeconomic management. They also came to appreciate that the state and the market needed to work in partnership, and that the liberalization of capital accounts and markets was not a panacea for growth. So what are the facts that cause a country to be globally competitive? They include stable macroeconomic policies, high levels of trust in the body politic, decent levels of technological penetration, a labor force equipped for a competitive economy, solid public and private institutions that form the foundation of prosperity, good governance, etc. 50 years ago, most of Asia was at least as poor as Africa. South Korea had the same income level per capita as Sudan and Ghana. And Ghana's citizens were richer than virtually all the Asians. As recently as 1982, average per capita income on a PPP basis in developing Asia was less than half of Africa's. But by 2008, Asia's per capita income was double that of Africa. Put another way, in the last 20 years, per capita incomes in Africa have slightly more than doubled, 2.2 times, while incomes in developing Asia have jumped 11-fold. China, in particular, has achieved what no country in history has done, doubling per capita incomes every 10 years over 30 years. Through concerted leadership, China is transforming from a rural to a manufacturing economy, which has meant that over a period of 25 years, roughly 600 million people were lifted out of poverty. This means a decline in poverty rates from 85% to 15%. Whereas currently Africa and Asia account for just 2%, whereas currently Africa accounts for just 2% of global GDP and Asia a further 25%, by 2050, Africa's contribution will have risen to 5% and Asia to an astonishing 50%. So together, we will account for well over 50% of global GDP. There are, fortunately, signs of positive human potential in many developing countries, which are being successfully harnessed to achieve demonstrable economic output. The number of engineers that are produced in India, for example, leave Europe and North America with little hope of successfully competing within India for engineering scarce talent. What we need, however, is for the human potential of all citizens of Africa and Asia to be similarly developed. Pockets of excellence are worthy of praise, but they must be replicated across the region. The least uncertain policy intervention that can aid both growth and equity is to invest in education. In our country, South Africa, the amount of money spent on education is already a large part of GDP and of the budget. This by international standards. And the next issue for education experts is to resolve how to spend this money more effectively to ensure that the education system plays a demonstrably positive role in reducing structural unemployment, and it contributes to a reduction in inequality. Duflo's main insight about the importance of investing in human capital is ultimately echoed by Roderick, although he delivers the insight from a different direction in a recent piece of analysis worth recalling. Roderick argues that we cannot assume that all developing economies will automatically converge on their developed counterparts. Many, sadly, will waste this historic opportunity. The ones that will succeed will have to transfer ideas and knowledge from the technology frontier. Most importantly, we need to go beyond conventional wisdom, he rightly says, in finding the drivers of growth success. It is not the obvious macroeconomic stability, good governance, and liberalization that will be sufficient. Beyond this conventional wisdom, it is also important that there be, and I quote, investment in physical and human capital, which not need be constrained by domestic savings. Developing countries can borrow from global financial markets to finance their accumulation. These policy discussions are politically and economically difficult to negotiate, but they are unavoidable. Growth without equity leads to a wealthier but less just society. Equity at the expense of growth leads to a more just but less wealthy society, and we must get the balance right. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to end my remarks by stepping back from the data and the economic case for Africa and pose a set of questions that is important for us to grapple with as citizens and as friends of these regions. I am convinced that we can activate Africa and Asia's economic potential. First, we need to believe in our own human potential. Markets around the world prey on confidence. Markets care as much, if not more, about perceptions than they do about reality. To be sure, the negative perceptions about our region are changing, but they do nevertheless linger on in various guises. I am optimistic, in fact, very optimistic about Africa and Asia, not as a matter of blind citizenship and loyalty, but precisely because the empirical facts about the economic directional changes that we have undergone are real. It is now up to us to tap into that potential by ensuring that the right policy decisions are made and to ensure that the convergence on the growth levels of the developing world continue well into the 21st century. I thank you.